We're going to start our second session here that's entitled Memory Work, and I'm going to hand the floor over to the moderator and the director of Jewish Studies who introduced the conference today, Professor Hava Tirosh-Samuelson.
Let's continue. So the topic we're going to spend some time wrestling with is a very challenging topic because memory is very elusive. After all, memory is not a discrete phenomenon or a fixed construction that is cemented permanently into our brains. Rather, memory is very mutable, and it involves the reconstructive process that is continuously, it comprises of those elements. We select, we add, we delete, we rearrange, and we update whatever is in our minds, all in order to serve the adaptive process of survival and living. So in contrast to ordinary memories, traumatic memories are actually fixed, and they are much more static. They are imprints from past overwhelming experiences, and they are deep impressions that are carved into the sufferer's brain, into the body of the sufferer, as well as into the psyche of the sufferer. They do not yield to change, nor are they readily available for updating with current information. So if you suffer traumatic experience, your body, your soul, your mind will experience it very, very viscerally. Traumatic memories live in manifold fears, in phobias, in physical symptoms and illnesses, and they can arise as fragmented splinters of inchoate sensations, emotions, images, smells, taste, thoughts, and so forth and so on. Traumatic memories may also take the form of unconscious acting out. And we act out in a certain behavior. We may not even totally be aware why we are doing certain things. And those things are replayed in our nightmares, in our obsessions, in our compulsions. Now, genocides are traumatic events, and their memories raise a host of challenges, not just for the individuals who survived the event, but to the societies that are committed to the post-genocide healing processes. So how shall memories of traumatic events be preserved for future generations? That's really the question for us in this session. What can and should be displayed for the public interest? What challenges do curators and directors of museums who are devoted to memorialization of genocides, what are their challenges as they face making various decisions? You have to make a lot of decisions when you run a museum. What is the role of the public in shaping the memorialization of the past, especially when the past is very painful and traumatic? And that's what we're going to deal with in this session. So let me introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Professor Pedro Gonzalez Corona from Northern Arizona University. He holds a dual appointment with the Departments of Contemporary Cultural Studies and Criminology, and the other department is Criminal Justice. I hope I got it right, the departmental division at NAU. In 2023-2024, he served as a postdoctoral fellow with the Martin Springer Institute at NAU, and we are very thankful for that institute for all the work they've been doing with us. Professor Corona holds a PhD from University of Texas, Dallas, that's from 2019, where he taught courses on the Holocaust, on human rights, on Latin American and Mexican history. He's a longtime human rights advocate, and he designed and taught many workshops and training sessions for other advocates and for the public when he served as the regional curator and coordinator at Amnesty International USA. He curated and coordinated the first seminar series of lectures on anti-Semitism in Latin America, a comparative perspective. That's what 2021-2022, and he has contributed a chapter to the book Remembering Mass Atrocities, Memory, Struggle, and Cultural Representation in the Global South. That came out in Palgrave 2023. So welcome, Professor Corona. The floor is yours, and we're going to take questions after your presentation.
I promise I was not going to move, but thank you so much. Good morning. I'm really happy that you're here. I wanted to begin my presentation by sharing some news. And this is a little bit difficult because it's like Primo Levi used to say, some kind of a gray zone, right? For us, and I mean the collective, and I'm going to refer to that group of people as the collective, is good news because I've been working with them for several years. That is last year in a town in Veracruz, Mexico, which is in the east coast of Mexico, in what we used to know as the Gulf of Mexico, but now it changed names. And what we are doing there is we're looking for mass graves. So the good news is that 50 meters behind us, after a lot of work, Araceli, who you can see in the front, and she's the president of that collective and the group, found a new mass grave. So that means that treasures, as they call them, right, human remains, are going to be going back home. And that is the purpose of the collectives, and they always get really happy and excited when they find that kind of a positive, as they call it, right? The lot gave a positive. So I wanted to start with that note because they are really excited because they don't know who's going to be in that mass grave. But the certainty is that somebody's going back home. So their family are going to have a place to go mourn and remember, right, that person who has been disappeared. So like I mentioned before, my presentation is going to be about the disappeared in Mexico, not to be confused with missing. It's a different thing, and I'm going to talk about it later. But first, I would like to give some context so you can understand what is going on here. The state of affairs in Mexico is really grave and obscure since 2006, when the war against drugs was declared by a president in Mexico. His name is Felipe Calderón. The number of persons, and this is related to the war on drugs and the fight against cartels and drug dealing organizations, right? Those are some numbers so you can get an idea. These groups are really powerful and have created a battleground throughout the country. And just to get an idea, 170,000 people are employed by these groups, DTOs. The number of people killed in this war has already surpassed 350,000. There are about 110,000 people disappeared in the official record. So that means that the real numbers are probably higher. And actually collectives and activists like to talk about probably the double of that number. There is about 30,000 people unidentified in morgues throughout Mexico, which is a really low number again. And the number of clandestine mass graves already surpasses 5,000, right? So if you look at the map in Mexico and you see the mass graves that have been located already, the whole map is going to look red, right? Because there's thousands of mass graves and only a few have been discovered so far. So there's a lot more. Just to give you an idea of the magnitude of these groups and how they are powerful in terms of money, employment, they compete with those companies that are really famous in Mexico and throughout Latin America. Some of them you can find even in Texas because they have already become international. You can find franchises such as Oxxo in Texas, Bimbo, which is a very large company. It sounds funny, but to us, it's just bread, right? They own Mrs. Bird in United States. They compete with Walmart and the largest telephone company in Latin America. So this is what we're facing when we talk about cartels and organized crime in Mexico. Like I was saying, a disappearance is not the same as missing, right? The difference mainly resides in the motivation. When a person is missing, it can be missing for multiple reasons and just, maybe a personal decision to not be found or many other circumstances. But in the case of a disappearance, we need to think about the state having a part in the assassination and kidnapping and disposal, or a private agent that somehow is not going to be investigated or prosecuted by the state. So we need to consider that this implies a denial by the state in the first place, or the direct participation of the state. So the argument here is that a lot of private groups and criminal organizations commit disappearances, and they are not directly part of the state. However, the denial of the state to recognize and acknowledge that this is happening makes the state a direct culprit of this crime. It's happening massively since 2006. Before that, we had only 200 people registered as disappeared. After 2006, the numbers really go high through the roof, to the extent that now the government, as of 2 months ago, had recognized 121,000, right? And there is no way to handle a very precise figure here, because unfortunately, it changes every day. This situation has created a changing culture. And one of the things that attracted my attention since 2007, 2008, is how we are creating new words to define what is happening to us as a country. And some of those words are really powerful and are associated with the way in which we remember those tragedies. So just to give you an example, newspapers, scholars, TV anchors, they already include this type of lexicon in their reports. So we talk about a necrocene, right? A place in which you find death, right? For somehow political purposes. You talk about narco-violence, narco-politics, gore capitalism, horrorism, and these are more like popular culture terms like levantado. Levantado means to pick up something really fast, but in this case applies to kidnapping somebody who is not going to make it back home, right? So we see a lot of reports and news reports that include the word levantado. What you're seeing in the image is an encobijado. That means a person that has been wrapped in a blanket, and that was a popular term when the war first exploded, because a lot of cartel members and innocent people ended up like that in the side of the road, right? So these trends change throughout time. The last word, pozoleado, comes from pozole, which is like some kind of a stew that's really popular in Mexico. In reality, what it means is to dissolve somebody in chemical substances, right? It became really popular as well. So you see how death here has a different meaning that has nothing to do with the sacred and with any kind of ritual. It's just for economic purposes or political purposes. That situation, of course, goes hand in hand with the issue of remembering those who have been killed or disappeared. And I wanted to address one of the first memorials in Mexico. We don't usually call this memorial because it has a different meaning in Spanish, right? We call them monumentos or monuments. But this is one from 2012, which is exactly the year in which the first term of Calderón, who is the president who declared the war on drugs, ended. This monument has been controversial because it's sponsored by the state. I read an account by a couple of scholars who were analyzing the situation of memory and remembrance in Mexico, and they collected an interview by one of the activists associated with the justice movement in Mexico, and they say that the monument looks like an angry god threw from the sky those iron plates, and they just fell, right? The architect in charge, the company in charge of designing the monument took inspiration on the Berlin Memorial for the Jewish victims, right? So you see how different this is, but architects and designers tend to justify it beautifully, right? And talk about the landscape and how it mixes with architecture and the purpose and all that. But the people, the victims, the citizens didn't think so. So that is the memorial for the victims of violence in general. This is in 2012, and there was already a need after 6 years of the war on drugs to do something on the part of the state, right? This has nothing to do with citizens yet. That is Felipe Calderón, and another one of his highlights during his term was this thing called the Estela de Luz, like the stela, like the pillar of light, which originally was to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Mexican independence and the 100th anniversary of the Mexican Revolution. Most people consider this is a waste of money. It was built with imported materials, not anything locally available. It was just a display of arrogance, I think, and most people didn't like it because it doesn't mean anything. Well, for most of us, it was, remembering the independence and the revolution, but it implied corruption, and a lot of millions were missing during construction. So you know what I'm saying. I'm going to go back to this monument again. As another consequence of this movement and the violence spreading throughout Mexico, we see that citizens, because there's no participation of the state in searching, there's only like 2% of crimes in Mexico get some kind of attention and investigation, right? So those who get an answer and conviction are even less, right? And this is, again, a number that is not exact, is not precise, but we can talk about, between 2 and 3% of crimes not being investigated. So citizens organize themselves to look for their own relatives. And they form colectivos or search collectives. Right now, we have over 100 collectives. Some people believe that almost 200 collectives doing this kind of work. And this is the president of the collective that I've been working with, Araceli Salcedo, to your left. This is another collective member, Araceli Rodriguez Nava, and she is the person whose case gives the name to my presentation. Her case is about her son, who was a federal police officer who was disappeared. And she was told, and this is a really common story among people who search, right? They get information from the outside and even from the very young criminals about the possible locations of the mass graves, right? Where they dumped the bodies. And she was told that her son was in a very specific place. She could not find him, but what she did is she took a jar of Nescafe, which is a very popular brand of instant coffee in Mexico. And she took some of that dirt because she thought that actually her son was there. So she carries everywhere she goes the picture of her son, but also the Nescafe jar. So there's a scholar in Mexico who name that kind of action to create an allegorical dwelling, because she thinks that her son is living there in that dirt that she picked up from that specific place. And I connect that directly with what Araceli and her collective were doing, because they created those dolls that you see there. They call them children. And this gets really complex because they handle the children as if they were alive, and at the same time they know they are not the person, right? So they carry some kind of a numinous meaning for them, right? By numinous, I mean that they carry somehow the soul of the person who has been disappeared, but also they are instruments of memory. And I'm going to tell you why. But before that, I need to say that the colectivos or collectives, they do a lot of work that the state should be doing, that the government should be doing. Those are pictures from my last trip, and that is a ranch where they found the positive that I just mentioned. That is the house where the criminals operated from. And there's a lot of stories of things that happened there, but the result is that the people who disappeared, they bury in the back, right? And there's dozens of people who they have found already in that particular ranch. What the collectives do is they gather any kind of information associated with the disappearance, like if they were the police, they do forensic work, they go on the field, they survey the lots, they probe the land using very rustic methods, like a rebar, just to go a few feet down, and then they smell the rebar to see if there's any kind of decomposition smell, and they get so their senses get so sharp that they can distinguish between anything, an animal, trash, natural decomposition, and a human body. So these women, because it's mostly women and mostly mothers, put a lot of effort. They get segregated from their own families and from society because they get so focused on what they are doing, right? Some of them lose other family members, not because they get disappeared, but because they say like, okay, we cannot do this anymore. You are somehow obsessed with this. But it's not an obsession, it's a commitment. They have to find their children. That's in the same backyard, and that was the first positive in the ranch like 7 years ago. That's Araceli showing me. As you can see, she's wearing a bulletproof vest because this type of work is done in the presence of the perpetrators most of the time. So the perpetrators are looking at you from the mountains. And this is the collective members with their children. These children wear the clothing that once belonged to the disappeared person. They try to reproduce the physiognomy the best they can, but it's just symbolic. And they go everywhere, they have presentations or exhibitions with their children. As you can see, they also carry banners with the pictures of the disappeared as they look when they disappeared. And they have all the information that should be required and broadcast by the police, right? When the notification of disappearance happens. However, it doesn't happen. Collectives need to do that kind of work. They engage in numerous demonstrations throughout the year. And what that disappearance does, and this is just my own perspective, is that somehow has the effect of a genocide, right? It's not the same. We cannot call it that, right, technically, but it has certain effects, right, on society that look like genocide. It changes the identity and usually affects, like Doreen was saying, right? Those who Sigmund Bauman calls wasted lives, right? Those who are not relevant, those who have no access to justice in a system such as the Mexican system, right? This crime affects more victims, poor people, activists, right? The state and authority re-victimize the victims and somehow cooperate in the crime all the time, either by action or omission. I noticed working with the collective that there are certain dynamics that I call microdynamics of collaboration. If you notice the first picture, there are federal agents and army and lawyers with us, right? They represent the state and the government. And they are really good friends with them, and they are willing to give their lives for them. So it's just kind of bizarre and weird that the very own state has agents working with the collectives, right? They become really close, and they do their work at that level. However, when we go up in the ladder and chain of command, people just don't want to do their work, right? So we see that kind of cooperation at the very micro level. And then the collectives have a very important function of memory and remembrance by constantly reminding the public, right? Because the public doesn't want to know anything about this issue. What they do with their healing dolls can be, summarized here, right? They talk to the dolls, they sing with the dolls, they walk, they vent, they holler at the dolls, and they ask them, hey, where are you? I want to find you, right? And then they apologize, they cry. I've heard stories about people going back home and they sit down with the doll to watch TV. Fathers play with the children like when they were little, right? They perform rituals of roll call because they always talk about the disappeared in present tense. You will never hear a mother or a collective member say, my son was, or my daughter was. They always say, my daughter is. And speaking of Emily, who liked pink and Hello Kitty, Araceli's daughter, Ruby, she also liked pink and Hello Kitty and Mimi Mouse. So she always speaks in the present tense, even it's been years since she has been seen alive. They take him to celebrations, they take selfies, they travel, like Araceli was last year at NAU, and she brought Ruby, her child, with her. They work, they do housekeeping, you name it, they dance. However, they have a clear understanding that the doll is not a disappeared person, right? So it's a complex relationship. Now, we see this crisis and we see this violence spreading, right? 2 weeks ago, probably you heard in the news that in a ranch in Jalisco, they found a place of extermination. And we're already talking about extermination, right? A place that systematically exterminated people associated with cartels, extortions, things like that. Hundreds of bodies and hundreds of items belonging to somebody who had been disappeared were found, like shoes, clothing, personal items. And it's believed that the place was a training facility. So imagine how this is happening in a systematic way already, right? To confront that, we see the work of the collectives, but also certain segments in Mexican society, civil society, who organize themselves and create anti-monuments. That means that this is a response to those monuments created by the state, which are very few, right? And they do it in a way in which they are really symbolic and powerful. These are placed in Avenida Reforma, which is one of the most important in Mexico City, and they symbolize atrocities and tragedies. Like this is the 43. Maybe you heard me my students talk about this before. The 43 students who were disappeared in 2014 in Iguala, in the state of Guerrero. There are more anti-monuments, such as this, the 72 in San Fernando, Tamaulipas, the case of immigrants traveling trying to reach United States. They were kidnapped by a cartel and executed. So that's the case of the 72. The anti-monumenta, which is the feminine of monumento, right? Because in Spanish, we have feminine and masculine words. And this is dedicated to the women who have fell victim of feminicide, which is not a homicide, right? It's different. There's a politics to it. And it is across the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico. And the anti-monumenta has the capacity to not only make you remember like the monument that we saw at the beginning, right? A monument makes you remember the atrocity or the event. The argument here is that the anti-monumenta or anti-monument disrupts the linearity of history. So it's somehow like Walter Benjamin used to say, right? To apply the brakes of history and to make you connect with the event, because the event, in this case, the fact, it is a human rights violation that is immovable, is unchangeable. That damage is there, is irreversible, right? So that is the purpose of these anti-monuments, according to their creators. This is Ruby, the daughter of Araceli, and she placed that plaque with her case in 2014, and she placed it at the Estela de Luz. You remember the monument that I told you it was useless? Mm-hmm. Well, the people, the citizens, decided to make it useful, and they went and they said, like, okay, we're going to reclaim this space, and this waste of money, we're going to give it a different meaning. And they placed those plaques for the disappeared, right? Now it has a purpose. It's part of the anti-monument. They were removed at some point, but they were put back. This type of memorial cost a lot of money. So in the collective that Araceli directs, there was only one plaque, right? Because it cost a lot of money. But that's Ruby's plaque, and there's a lot more in the same place. This is another way of memorialization, and this is on Orizaba in Veracruz, where the collective has the residents, right? That's Araceli as well. They have been fighting, even though this happens in a private property wall, they have been fighting with the city because the city insists that this kind of memorialization uglifies the city, right? So they paint over because they don't like it, but the owner of the house gave them permission to do so. So it has the name of the collective, and it has some of the pictures taken from photographs of those disappeared, and Ruby is there, and many other disappeared who are relatives of the collective members are there. Yes, yes. So this is all to say that Mexico is in a crisis caused by the war on drugs associated with intense criminal organization. And well, this is, I'm not going to describe exactly what that is because it is to talk about, international corporations operating in multiple countries, making millions of dollars by not only engaging in drug trafficking, but many other diverse businesses that include extortions, kidnappings, and the disposal of either enemies or those who somehow were in their way for whatever reason. The work of the collectives is not only to acquire any kind of information associated with the disappeared, it's also about processing those materials, keeping a record of those materials, creating awareness, doing some kind of a memory activism so the disappeared don't get lost again in oblivion, right? Because this is about a person who had a name, who had a purpose in life, and it has been somehow deprived of their own memory and life. So I think that what they do in collaboration with some members of the state is really important in terms to preserve the memory that has been suppressed by the government and by the state. That is something important that I would like to note, that those monumentos or monuments are usually something that obscure the panorama, right? The landscape of violence in Mexico. They usually don't have the meaning. They don't include the names unless the people go and write the name or do some kind of a graffiti or plaque, like the one that Araceli had to pay for in order to have Ruby remembered. That is my presentation today. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.
If, 5 minutes, go ahead, yes?
First of all, I want to thank you for talking about this. This is a topic that is usually not discussed in the United States, so thank you so much. My question is, many people around the world, including Latinos living in the US, believe that after the new presidency of the Morena party, which is President Sheinbaum and President López Obrador, that the number of desaparecidos have decreased. Do you believe that is true?
No, it's not. It actually increased a lot, right? So even this is paradoxical because you see more disposition to talk and to work with the collectives. And like I say, in certain cases, these microdynamics can be really intense and meaningful. However, the number of the disappeared, and not only the disappeared, but those killed in events related to cartel violence and organized crime violence have increased. Now, that said, private citizens also engage in disappearances, and talking and working with the collective, I have identified cases in which disappearances have nothing to do with organized crime per se. They are related to the personal interest of somebody who knew the victim, right? So because impunity and the high level of incompetency that the government and the state tend to show, pretty much anybody can disappear a person, right? Speaking to another collective director and president, she says, all you need to do to disappear a person is just kill them with some kind of a discretion, killing with discretion, right? It's all you need. Who's going to investigate? Sometimes the task of the police and those taking the deposition and, those who open up the file, right? Is just to do that, to register your name and to create a file and leave it there, right? There's not going to be no investigation. And because of the, brutal numbers in which it's happening, there's no task force or anything that can follow up. So no, it's the other way around.
Is there any official record by the state that exists on disappeared persons, or is it purely on the collectives that are they the only ones keeping track and reporting on these statistics?
Oh, thank you. In 2017, Mexico approved a law on the disappeared, and that law established the creation of an organism in charge of keeping count, right, of the disappeared and promoting actions in order to find them and to slow down the process of disappeared in Mexico. So they handle those official numbers. And those are the numbers that I'm showing you here. Like I say, they change every day, unfortunately. They are not accurate. And collectives rely on some other sources of information, such as journalistic accounts and other sources, in order to have an idea what's going on, right? But if you want the official numbers, you can look up the National Commission for the Disappeared, and that's where you can find that number. But yeah, there's a commission in place.
We'll take one more question and then go to.
Since the Mexican government works with
Louder, please.
since the Mexican government works with the cartels or at least collaborates with them sometimes, is there any way like international like parties can like help Mexico with the whole crisis? Like maybe the US or the ICC?
I think there has
Can
always
you
been.
repeat the question? It was hard to hear.
Yeah, since sometimes cartels are associated with government work, is there a way in which international groups or parties can help in this situation? And the answer is yes, and it usually happens in the way of training. They offer workshops. If you mean somebody who can come and oversee the process, it has happened before, and there's like human rights recommendations and all that kind of thing, right? Investigations, scholars, we write about it all the time. There's books every day, right? Articles. And at some point, what we're looking for is just to create awareness, right? It's so difficult to intervene. It's so difficult. Especially internationally, right? Because of sovereignty issues and all that kind of stuff. So it is not easy, even though the intention is there.
You have one online?
One online, okay, we'll take that.
Okay, this is from Kevin Barea. Do you agree that Trump's administration must declare cartels in Mexico to be terror organizations, like if these were Islamic terrorist movements? I know, it's loaded.
We'll leave
Yeah.
it for Trump.
It's loaded. I wouldn't think so. Yeah, because, organized crime is one of those abstract things that we still use, such as terrorism or the war on drugs, right? So who are we talking about? Who are we going to target? Who's part of that business that is already international and very corporate, right? Are we going to go after the banks who handle their money, or the real estate agents who sell them, mansions here in border states? So that is a good question. But I wouldn't think so.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Corona.
Thank you.
Right, so in a sense, your very interesting presentation was about something which may not be genocide yet, but as you said, the impact is very much like the genocide impact. We are going to talk now about a different genocide, which is definitely a genocide, was a genocide, and is a paradigmatic genocide, and that, of course, relates to the Holocaust. So our second speaker is Rabbi Jeffrey Schesnol, from the Arizona Jewish Historical Society. Rabbi Schesnol is the spiritual leader of O Adam, a congregation of humanistic Judaism here in Phoenix. He is the current director of the Arizona Jewish Historical Society, where for the past 15 years or so, or maybe I'm wrong about the date, he has overseen programs related to Holocaust education. Actually, it's only 10 years. It's since 2015. Rabbi Schesnol is the project manager of a new Hilton Center of Holocaust Education that will be built here in Phoenix at the same site, the current site of the Arizona Jewish Historical Society. So he has a lot of experience in curating and making decisions about how to memorialize, how to present things in a museum, in a setting of a museum. In addition to his rabbinic ordination from 2022, he holds also a Master of Arts degree in Jewish Studies from Spurgeon Institute in Chicago, Illinois. So, Rabbi Schesnol, please come to the podium.
Thank you for inviting me. And I will tell you that Professor Samuelson had a great deal to do with my decision to pursue higher education in Jewish studies. I spoke with her before I embarked upon my work in master's studies of Jewish master's degree. I spoke with her before studying to become a rabbi, and she was a great source of inspiration and advice. So thank you for that. We spoke this morning as we are looking at the history and memory of important events. I'm going to speak of history and memory, and I'd like to differentiate between them. By the way, they say, Mark Twain said, history may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
That's working.
Great. Nope, you're three slides ahead of me. Back again. Thank you. This is not about perfection, it's about connection. So I think we need to always keep that in mind. So history is the scholarly, intellectual, evidentiary reconstruction of events. And you can see that it involves documentation and corroboration. It uses documents, photographs, artifacts, objects. It's very objective and pursues the truth and is always open to new evidence. Memory is the personal or collective recollection shaped by cultural narratives and emotions, collective experiences that are passed down generationally, frequently beginning orally and then transcribed. Memory is shaped by cultural values, often influenced by emotions and biases and preconceived notions. It does afford the maintenance of cultural identity, and it is subjective, influenced by current perspectives, and they say the truth is in the eye or in the ear of the beholder. Public history is all-encompassing of various fields with roots extending through time and space, evolving through centuries, and it asserts the authority of evidence in academia, ever intellectually skeptical, recorded from multiple sources, and always probing for accuracy and precision. Public memory depends on recollection among members of a given community, relies on the authority of community membership, leaders, and experiences. Time is the reinforcement over centuries of repetitive ritual and habit. Origins I indicated, are often originally transmitted. And when recorded, the final source may or may not resemble the original teller, like the game of telephone, where you start at one end of the room and end up with a different outcome at the other. Jewish people have been around a long time. They have a long history, 4,000 years of recorded history and memory. Many of these revolve around holidays. In 13 days, Jews and their guests will celebrate the holiday of Passover. And that story begins in Egypt and continues through the desert. And it prompts a question. Does anybody know when the first ghetto was established? The first Jewish ghetto?
Venice.
Venice in 1516. As a matter of fact, 2 days ago, March 29th was the anniversary. However, that was the first evidentially recorded history of a ghetto, but I would submit to you there was an earlier ghetto than 1516 in Venice, because in Egypt, the Jewish Israelites were separated from the other population of Egypt into Goshen, which was a ghetto. And it remained identifiable as such, and it was the location from which the Israelites left. And as it turns out, wait a minute. I think I'm jumping.
You want us to go forward?
Okay, so the Israelites had begun to assimilate into Egyptian culture, a tragic pattern that emerged, a pattern destined to be repeated over and over again across the long Jewish national journey. And the harder the Israelites tried to fit in, the more assiduously they tried to be like those around them. They incurred the enmity of their neighbors and set the stage for their own persecution, first by choice and then by force. The Israelites remained a population separate within Egypt, soon enslaved and pushed back into Goshen. So another question, when did the Holocaust begin? Anybody give me a date, a year? Some say 1933, some say 1939, some say 1941-42. I would submit that the Holocaust began much, much earlier, because the foundations of it began hundreds and hundreds of years before. Hitler didn't devise something new. He picked up a lot of things that were done much, much earlier by generations and civilizations that preceded him. Let's ask a couple of questions. One is, why? Well, as the very first monotheistic religion, Judaism was an abnormality, an outlier in the ancient polytheistic world. The Assyrian Empire in 722 before the Common Era conquered the 10 tribes of northern Israel, and the Babylonians in 586 and 87 exiled the first Israelites into Babylon, and they destroyed the first temple, the Temple of Solomon. The Greek Empire of Alexander the Great in 334 before the Common Era conquered vast lands, including what we now call Israel. The Romans conquered an even larger land area, beginning in 31 before the Common Era, extending to 284 of the Common, and they destroyed the Second Temple, the rebuilt temple, in 70 of the Common Era, which created the longest diaspora and lasted until 1948. The genocide of Jews in Alexandria, Egypt, in 115 to 117 of the Common Era. And the Roman Empire made Christianity its official religion in 30 of the Common Era, with the edict issued by Emperor Theodosius I, which included Christian violence against Jews in the early Byzantine period from 300 to 450 of the Common Era. So, way long before Adolf Hitler, long before medieval church anti-Semitism, the foundation was already laid, and it was in place. So let's put a humanizing picture on this, this group of people, the Jewish people. and this long history of anti-Semitism. We need to remember that anti-Semitism began long before the church created their doctrine of anti-Semitism, long before Christian beliefs and themes gave expressions of anti-Jewish prejudices, including the charge that Jesus was killed by Jews, that Judas' betrayal of Jesus was symbolic of Jewish treachery and greed. So we know Jesus was born and lived as a Jew, and the earliest Christians thought of themselves as Jews, but eventually, in order to win new followers and protect themselves from Roman persecution, the Christians began to separate themselves. They were kind of vying for an audience, proselytizing each to their own unique divisions and sect. The changing attitude toward Jews and Judaism is reflected in the Gospels. In Matthew 27:25, and which is repeated in John, you have standing before Pontius Pilate a group of Jews who call for the death of Jesus, bay of blood of Jesus, and says as a group, quote, "His blood be upon us and upon our children." That line becomes fateful because it seems to implicate not only those Jews who were there at the time, but the inheritors of that entire tradition over all of time. The charge that Jews were responsible for killing Christ has been refuted by historians because persecution was a Roman punishment, not a Jewish punishment. Jews would certainly not have had the power to impose a death penalty as it is described in Christian texts. However, the myth that Jews were Christ killers was impactful because Christians believed if a people were capable of killing their God, they were capable of just about anything. After all, genocide was and remains the most severe form of criminal murder. With that as a backdrop, there was hope in the New World in the United States as it was originally founded, and President George Washington, who really invented the presidency, said in a letter to a congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, "The citizens of the United States have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation." Goes on to say, "All possess a like liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship," etc. But the key word is the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. Those words ring so true, and it requires only that those who live under its protection should deem themselves to be good citizens and giving it their support at all times. Cherished by American Jews, Washington's letter mirrored the congregation's invitation to him and gave the presidential imprimatur to a Jewish vision for the newly established country. It wasn't necessarily always followed. After all, in New England, they had laws prohibiting Jews from holding public office. And this was one of the efforts that Washington tried to make to try and bring this important element of non-discrimination to a minority. Anti-Semitism refers to hostility or discrimination against Jews. It was coined in 1879 by German journalist Wilhelm Marr to designate anti-Jewish campaigns, and religious studies scholar Peter Schaeffer asserts the exclusive nature of the monotheistic Jewish faith, the misunderstood sense of being an elite chosen people, a refusal to intermarry, a different Sabbath observance, dietary differences, unique dress, and the practice of circumcision were all things that marked Jews in antiquity and subsequently, especially the ultra-religious and most Orthodox, who acted differently than the general population. They stood out as the other. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a fabricated text purporting to detail a Jewish plot for global domination, largely plagiarized from earlier sources. It was first published in Russia in 1903, translated into multiple languages, and disseminated internationally in the early part of the 20th century. It played a key part in popularizing belief in the international Jewish conspiracy and remains a popular selling book on the internet today. Anti-Semitism, the Longest Hate, written by Robert Westrich in 1994, provides a country-by-country look at anti-Semitism from its pagan beginnings to its recent reemergence in Europe and even on our own streets in our country today. Almost every culture from ancient times to the present has been infected with anti-Semitism. The description has been used to describe anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism by numerous contemporary authors and has become generally accepted as the appropriate description of Jewish hate. So the Holocaust, the systematic, bureaucratic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of approximately 6 million Jews and millions of others by the Nazi regime and its collaborators, had very early origins and foundations, and they created the history and memory for which we today try to tell why this event should not be forgotten. And there are lessons to be learned that will affect people of all denominations, all minorities, anyone who is under threat of being marginalized or discriminated against. And that is going to occur in a new location called the Hilton Family Holocaust Education Center, which will teach the lessons of the Holocaust and other genocides, 5 other genocides, beginning with the genocide of Native Americans. So we are aware that we are the storytellers that can help educate and to bring this into a very interactive and an immersive experience I mean, the truth of the matter is you can pick up your phone and you can find any information about the history of anti-Judaism, of anti-Semitism, of the Holocaust, all the data, the geographic locations, the numbers, and the horrors. But what this center will do that you cannot do on your computer or your phone is you will feel what it feels like. You will actually experience this learning as you're able to actually participate. Thank you.
So we have a few, if anybody would like to pose first a question to Rabbi Schesnol, we'll start with that. And then in the remaining maybe 5 minutes, we'll have some discussion more specifically about museums. So any questions for this presentation?
I'll start.
Go ahead.
Okay, so you used the quote from George Washington. I have a really hard time with using that as a quote that shows that America was good to the Jews, because at the time, and since then, America has been horrible to many, many different ethnic groups. And to use Washington to say, rah, rah, the United States is a country that has long protected people's individual rights, I don't know if that's really true. So I'm just wondering, like, what made you want to start with Washington and that quote as an example of something good that came out of the United States?
Well, your question is, and your comments are accurate. I bring it up because every era has elements within it that can give us hope. And I would say when there is empathy involved for others, that hope has a chance of being real. But it is evidentiary that there has been discrimination and so forth of Jews and many others. When Hitler was coming to power, he sent a number of his lawyers right here to the US to study the Jim Crow laws, to understand how they could most effectively prosecute the persecution of a minority. So yes, it's true. The United States has nothing to be proud of with regard to that. But also in every era, there are those who speak up. We look at approximately 100 years ago, the world was in turmoil. Just having survived World War I, a horrible, gigantic flu, global epidemic, enormous amounts of persecution and prejudice. 31 members of the US Congress were publicly members of the Ku Klux Klan, as were 7 governors during that time. But in the midst of it, in 1920, something happened. Congress passed the new amendment. It gave women the right to vote. So there are those glimmers of hope, those points of light,
Thank you, Jeffrey.
the pearl in the oyster.
But
That's
then
why I
2 years
chose it.
later, in 1924, we have immigrations.
Right, exactly.
Well,
Limits on immigration.
Right.
But that was definitely not just against East Europeans, but against Jews as well. So
so
how do we?
it is true, and it is. Professor Volker.
So the museum project, right, the Hilton Family Holocaust Education Center, which you are, one of the prime authors.
Project manager.
Yeah. So I think I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about its emphasis, particularly on Arizona survivors, which goes back to long efforts of the Arizona Jewish Historical Society. But also secondly, right, the museum is, has a very immersive aspect to it. It puts its visitors on a kind of an emotional journey to have that kind of emotional learning that you are not going to get from, reading a book. So, if you could just talk a little bit more about, right, the emphasis on Arizona survivors that I think is central to the project, but also, right, what does immersive learning mean? What perhaps are the limits of how much can, right, visitors today immerse themselves in a situation that's they probably cannot fully grasp. So, Arizona survivors focus and the benefits and limits of immersive learning.
Well, thank you for that. When we started this project, it started out as an art museum idea. The artwork of the Holocaust that was done by a Phoenix resident today named Robert Sutz, who is 95 years old and still painting and still sculpting, and an amazing individual. And we thought we would have this display of his work from the artwork, from the Holocaust, and his art would speak to that subject. It didn't gain a lot of traction. And we found that once we started to broaden the discussion and include other stories and make it more about the lessons learned, that it did affect a lot of people to the point of wanting to take it to another level. And it has grown from that level. It started out as just a remodel of an old brick cinder block building of about 2,500 square feet with a budget of $2.5 million, to it's now blossomed to over 30,000 square feet with a price tag of $45 million, of which we have now raised over $41 million to date. So a lot of people are interested in this, and they're interested because we're going to be telling the story of Arizonans, of people who experienced these stories that occurred during the Holocaust and afterward. And their stories can resonate with people because we can identify with them, and they live here. If you hear Oscar Knobloch talk and you realize he lives right down the street from you, and he's 99 years old, he'll be 100 on November 27th of this year. He's your neighbor. If you are going to listen to Esther Bash, who lives in Prescott, she is also 99. She's an old woman, but she has a story to tell, and her story resonates with people. When you have that identification with somebody who is part of your society, part of your community, that's a lot more important of a message than somebody's story thousands of miles away and many, many years ago that may be just perhaps a footnote in your memory. But once you actually experience it, that feeling is part of you and it doesn't go away. How that gets transmitted, if you take a look at the wonderful world of technology we have available to us today, where you can actually interactively engage in a hands-on experience, and you can actually be a part of it rather than just reading a narrative about it, that has a lot more power, and it is not something you'll forget. It will stay with you. It's not designed to be a Holocaust amusement park, don't get me wrong. It's designed to be a series of many high-tech experiences that make you feel like you're actually in the moment. And so for that reason, going through all of these exercises, which all cost a lot of money. So how many of you ever been to the MIM? Okay. So the same designers that designed the MIM are designing this center. So the MIM uses a lot of RF technology, radio frequency, where you walk in front of a particular instrument and then you hear it. So there's going to be a lot of that kind of technology in what goes into this center. A lot of activity that you'll be able to engage in. And you won't just be kind of walking through. You'll be seeing and hearing and feeling what is going to be your learning experience. It won't be a classroom experience at all. And it won't be done at arm's length. It will be done from you. And it may be traumatic in certain moments. It's not for real young people. You have to have the maturity to deal with the subject matter. By the way, we talked about memory before. There's such a thing as generational trauma and memory. And if the number of survivors continues to dwindle at its current rate, 10 years from now, there won't be any survivors alive. So we're going to have to depend on their children, who are old also. Imagine if you're 99 and your child is 74, they're not exactly your classmates, but they have grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and they are your classmates. So they'll be a part of the experience as well. So that is why we're doing it the way we are.
All right.
Thank you for your question.
Any other question that you can pose to, you can also
Yes,
pose
please.
to Professor Corona, yeah.
You mentioned the positives of the internet in education through mentions of like the interactive museum and also like having a bunch of information at your fingertips. But the internet has also been a source of a lot of misinformation and hatred being proliferated. Would you say that overall, like the growing role of the internet in our lives has been a positive or negative effect on our public memory of genocide?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in answer to your question, I kind of pose it as rabbis always give examples and they answer questions with questions. So is an airplane good or bad? If an airplane takes people to faraway places and does it in a manner that's expedient, it's good. If it drops bombs and kills people, it's bad. The internet is both. It's good and bad. And it's marvelous in terms of the technology, but it can be misused and is. And that's why portions of what we are going to be including in this new Holocaust Education Center are going to be, how do you tell the difference between things you can believe and things you can't believe? What are the signs? What are the elements that you should be on the lookout for to differentiate between the truth and the lies? And that is going to be a part of what is told. Good question.
Excellent. Good. All right, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Robin?
Can you give an idea of when the opening will occur? And if we want to bring young people, how do we arrange that down the road?
Yeah, great questions. So first of all, groundbreaking is June 5th, just, a couple of months from now. And we're going to open on April 1st, 2027, 2 years from tomorrow. By the way, that date is not flexible. It's being insisted upon by certain parties. So 2 years from tomorrow, the doors will open and hopefully everybody will be ready. We won't be in beta test. We'll be actually engaging and encouraging people's participation and visitation. One of the elements of this fundraising of $41+ million so far is we've gotten $11 million of public money. 7 million from the state of Arizona, 2 million from Maricopa County, and 2 million from the city of Phoenix. And part of the provisions that money is including is that students will always be able to come for free. So that's what that money is going to go help pay for. And whether the admission is $18 or something in that general vicinity, it's being studied and decided upon. Students will be visiting with no charge.
One more online.
One more
Yes.
line, and that would be
And
it.
then we can,
Yeah.
yeah, so this is actually not a question, it's a statement, but I think he would like you both to reflect on this. So it's to both of you, and this is from David Cater. He felt like this was a very moving presentation and he wants to thank you both. But he would be grateful for your thoughts on this idea that he's grappling with. Given his own engagement with Holocaust memory, or given my own, I found that this information in the talk is significantly different in one vital respect, namely monuments of memory is taking place while the disappearances are ongoing. That is something very different than memory of a past event. And can you both kind of reflect on that challenge and what that all means? Does that make sense? Okay.
They have to stand up at the podium, right?
Yes.
Only one at a time.
Okay.
Okay, Professor Corona.
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's already, it's been a few years since the disappearances associated with the collectives. Like I said, the war on drugs officially begins in 2006. It's over a decade old, and there's already a culture around disappearances, including remembering. The Mexican state has the tradition of burying things, right, in discourse and making things look like they didn't happen. So I know it's not very old. I know the events happened when I was already alive, right? However, I think memory is already very important because we see many versions of the events, right? We have an international version. We have a official version of what is going on, and we have the version of the victims who are mostly alive as a group, right? So we see the mothers like Araceli, who lost Ruby in 2012. If it wasn't for the collectives and those efforts of anti-monument and monument and all that discussion, they would be buried, because that is the purpose of a disappearance, to forget about the person. And like I said, like in genocide, to kill the genus, right? To kill any kind of narrative, to disappear the person, not only physically, but historically. So I think that requires a lot more analysis and a lot more research, because yes, it's ongoing, but for some people it has been over a decade, right? So the new generations don't know about this, even though there's news, right? They don't know about the magnitude. And one of the collective members, who is a photographer, he's an artist, and he produced the photographs that we showed at the Martin Springer in the exhibit. He usually posts in his social media a slogan that says, "Si no me pasa a mí, me vale madres," which means if it doesn't happen to me, I don't give a damn, right? So that is the culture that we are seeing in Mexico, because there's stigma. And not because the problem is so grave and runs so deep in our society, We can think that everybody is on board with memorialization and the fight for justice. It's the other way around. The mothers also need to fight stigma in the streets and in the house and with their own family, and especially the re-victimization by the state and the government, right? So that's why this fight is so unique, because it's happening in real time, but for some people, it's been already a lot of years.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So we're going to end it here, and we heard at least three different approaches to memory work, right? The original one was about ritual and text. That's what the Jewish tradition is about. Then we have the second meaning of memory work, the work that is done in museums, when we collect the data and we display it in a certain way and we interpret it. And then the third one that you talked about, which is really from the bottom up, so to speak, kind of a grassroots remembering of the atrocities, and all of those three meanings are operating at the same time. So thank you so much for enlightening presentations. And we're going to take now a break for lunch.
Break, and we will be starting promptly at 1:45.